Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has publicly accused the Indian government of assassinating Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a prominent independent Sikh leader and a Canadian citizen. In June, Nijjar was shot dead outside a Sikh temple in the city of Surrey, British Columbia, by two masked gunmen who escaped in a waiting car. His murder sparked widespread fear across Canada's large Sikh community. 3 years before his killing, India's government designated Nijjar a terrorist. On Monday, Trudeau blamed India's government for orchestrating his assassination.
Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. It is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open, and democratic societies conduct themselves.
Mr. Trudeau reportedly raised the assassination with the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, as well as President Biden. On Monday, Canadian Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly said she had expelled India's top intelligence official in Canada. In response, India expelled a senior Canadian diplomat. India has rejected Trudeau's charges, calling them absurd and politically motivated. Climate scientists are sounding the alarm over record low levels of sea ice off the coast of Antarctica ahead of the start of spring in the southern hemisphere. Sea ice helps to prevent the rapid flow of ice from Antarctica's glaciers into the ocean, which can drive global sea level rise. Satellite data show 930,000 fewer square miles of sea ice extent surrounding Antarctica compared to the September average, far below any previous winter level. Walter Meyer, a researcher at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, told the BBC, quote, "It's so far outside anything we've seen, it's almost mind-blowing," he said. Here in New York, police arrested at least 149 climate protesters Monday after they flooded Manhattan's financial district for a day of peaceful protests. Activists are demanding banks stop funding coal, oil, and gas projects. More protests are planned for today. In Massachusetts, 9 members of the environmental movement Extinction Rebellion were arrested Monday as they peacefully occupied the office of Governor Maura Healey to demand an immediate phase-out of fossil fuels.
It's going to be hard. We know that. But how much harder is it going to be the longer we wait? We've already waited too long. The people who are in power now are the ones who need to take action now. Stop passing the buck. Stop pushing it down the line. We only have a few years left before it's too late.
We'll have more on this week's historic climate protests later in the broadcast. A Minnesota judge has dismissed criminal charges against 3 Indigenous water protectors who were arrested while protesting at the construction site of Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline in 2021. The 3 women, Winona LaDuke, Tanya Albid, Dawn Goodwin, were arrested on the banks of the Mississippi River on ceded Anishinaabe land as they sang, danced, and prayed near construction crews. In a landmark opinion delivered Monday, Aitkin County Judge Leslie Metzen wrote the women were exercising their rights to free speech and to freely express their spiritual beliefs. The judge dismissed the charges against them in the interests of justice, she said, including, quote, to criminalize their behavior would be the crime. 5 U.S. citizens released from prison in Iran Monday have arrived back in the United States following a rare prisoner swap agreement between the United States and Tehran. They were freed after the U.S. unfroze $6 billion of Iran's oil revenue and released 5 Iranians held in the United States. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke to the 5 Americans after their release.
I can tell you that it was, for them, for me, an emotional conversation. It's easy in the work that we do every day sometimes to get lost in the abstractions of foreign policy and relations with other countries and forgetting the human element that's at the heart of everything we do.
We'll have more on Iran after headlines. Here in New York, the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly got underway Monday with an urgent call to action on the environment. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said nations need to work urgently to end the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. He also called for a global rescue plan to meet the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, including the elimination of extreme poverty and malnutrition.
In our world of plenty, hunger is a shocking stain on humanity and an epic human rights violation. It is an indictment of every one of us that millions of people are starving in this day and age.
Heads of state from at least 145 countries are attending the UN General Assembly this week. Conspicuously absent are the leaders of 4 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: China, Russia, France, and the UK. President Biden's devoting a substantial portion of his speech today to advocate for increased support for Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is attending the General Assembly for the first time since Russia's invasion in early 2022. He will then head to Washington, D.C., where he will meet with President Biden, but will not again give a joint session of Congress address. The New York Times reports a deadly September 6th strike on a crowded marketplace in eastern Ukraine was the result of an errant Ukrainian air defense missile, not a Russian attack, as was widely first reported. The New York Times cited evidence, including missile fragments, satellite imagery, witness accounts, and social media posts that strongly suggest the catastrophic strike was the result of a Ukrainian radar-guided surface-to-air missile that went astray. At least 15 civilians died, 30 more were injured. Meanwhile, China's foreign minister has begun a 4-day trip to Russia. The visit by top diplomat Wang Yi to Moscow comes after he met with White House officials in Malta over the weekend. On Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with China's vice president on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly ahead of a possible high-level U.S.-China summit later this fall between Biden and Xi. Mexican journalist Emilio Gutierrez Soto has been granted asylum in the United States after 15 years of fighting for protection. Gutierrez and his son fled Mexico in 2008 after receiving death threats over Gutierrez's reporting on corruption within the Mexican military in the northern state of Chihuahua. They were detained for 7 months, eventually released to live in the United States while an asylum appeal was pending. Democracy Now! Spoke with Gutierrez by phone in 2017 as he was jailed at a U.S. detention center in El Paso, Texas, awaiting possible deportation.
Well, if we are deported, that obviously implies death. Why? Because ICE, under the Department of Homeland Security of the United States, by law, must give a report to the immigration authorities of Mexico and the consulate. And the immigration officials in Mexico have no credibility. It's impossible to trust in them. To the contrary, many of those officials, many personnel at the consulate or immigration service are caught up with organized crime.
In labor news, striking auto workers have expressed skepticism over President Biden's comments siding with the UAW. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain has said he will not endorse Biden's 2024 re-election run as the union, quote, expects actions, not words. Several Democratic members of Congress have joined the picket line in recent days, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who made a trip to Detroit Sunday to express solidarity. Meanwhile, Donald Trump said he plans to skip the second Republican presidential primary debate in California next week to speak in Detroit. Trump has accused the current UAW leadership of failing its members and appealed for the support of auto workers. UAW President Fain has also been critical of Trump. This all comes as the strike of some 12,700 auto workers has entered a 5th day. This is UAW member Stu Jackson speaking from a picket line in Wayne, Michigan.
We don't want to wait 4 years to get it. We need it now. We need it now. You know, and that's the way they've been doing us. You know, these bonus checks, we don't need bonus check. We need cost of living allowance. You know, we need to keep up with what's going on in the economy.
And more than 60 members of Australia's parliament from across the political spectrum have written an open letter urging President Biden to halt his efforts to prosecute Julian Assange. The WikiLeaks founder, who's an Australian citizen, faces espionage and hacking charges that could see him sentenced to up to 175 years in prison for publishing classified U.S. military and diplomatic cables, including evidence of war crimes. Assange has been held in London's infamous Belmarsh prison since 2019, awaiting possible extradition to the United States. In their open letter, the Australian lawmakers call on the U.S. to abandon its prosecution of Assange, writing, quote, "It serves no purpose, it is unjust, and we say clearly, as friends should always be honest with friends, that the prolonged pursuit of Mr. Assange wears away at the substantial foundation of regard and respect that Australians have for the justice system of the United States of America," unquote. The letter appears as an ad in the Washington Post. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.